Quorum call is lifted, and you may speak as if in morning business.
Madam President, thank you very much. Yesterday I was on the Senate floor where I had the opportunity to highlight a development at the Department of Agriculture. We learned yesterday afternoon that the Department of Agriculture in an employee newsletter was promoting something called Meatless Mondays. And the Department of Agriculture's newsletter offered the encouragement for their employees, and I assume others who might see the newsletter, but perhaps even the tourists who visit Washington, D.C. and eat at the Department of Agriculture's cafeteria, to participate in Meatless Monday. And it indicates that the desirability of reducing the consumption of meat and dairy products in their newsletter. And I found that very startling, surprising. Never in my life would I expect the Department of Agriculture, who I always presume is the farmer and rancher's friend, promoting the idea that it is a bad idea to eat the products of farms across Kansas, ranches across Kansas and our nation. And yet that's what we saw and read yesterday. The Department of Agriculture's newsletter says that beef production requires lots of water, fertilizer, fossil fuels, pesticides, and there are many health concerns related to excessive consumption of meat. Those are the words of the Department of Agriculture's own newsletter. I'm pleased to report that in asking Secretary Vilsack to reconsider what the department had said and was promoting, they've done that. They've apparently removed the promotion, the newsletter, from their website, and that's a positive development, and so I appreciate that happening. But it is amazing to me that this, unfortunately, is just one of many circumstances in which we see administration, agencies, and departments on the side of something that those of us who believe strongly in traditional family agriculture across the country believe is very important. And one would expect, in this case, a Department of Agriculture that promotes the consumption of beef. In fact, we have within the Department of Agriculture, in fact, the Secretary says in his mission statement that he is about increasing and expanding domestic and foreign markets for beef and meat products. We have the U.S. Beef Board, organized and monitored by the Department of Agriculture, whose job it is to promote agricultural products. We spend lots of effort, many of us in Congress over the last several years, trying to encourage the sale of agricultural products, particularly meat and beef in particular, products to South Korea, to China. We have debated on the Senate floor the value of trade agreements, most recently with Colombia, South Korea, and Panama, because we believe in the sale, the opportunity for American producers to sell their product around the globe. And yet we saw at least some who at USDA have the view that we need to be discouraging the consumption of meat for both environmental and health reasons. And particularly troublesome is the fact that the Department of Agriculture was citing the United Nations as a reason that we ought to discourage the consumption of beef for environmental reasons. Our Department of Agriculture positions ought to be based upon sound science, not some UN study. Beef is an important and vital component of the Kansas economy. We're the second largest beef producing state in the country. Economic impact to our country is around $44 billion. Exports in 2011, beef exports were over $4.08 billion. This matters to us greatly, and this is happening at a time in which the cattle producers of Kansas and across the Midwest, including in the state of the president today, the drought is so damaging to us, and it's also happening at a time in which we've been having a debate about a farm bill. And my farmers in Kansas, they'll often say, I know we need to do something about reducing spending. We've got to get the deficit under control. And in fact, the farm bill that we passed in the Senate is a reduction in the farm bill spending of $23 billion. Farmers are not, no one likes to see something that's important to them go away. But as a result of, if this farm bill becomes legislation, direct payments leave. They become the safety net for producers across our country is less, and yet farmers and ranchers say that we have a responsibility as American citizens to give these things up, to reduce the spending that comes our way. but please don't do anything that is damaging to us as far as our ability to earn a living in the free market, in the real world. And so when we see things like this from the Department of Agriculture discouraging the use of meat products, and again, at a time in which the temperatures across my state have been over 100 degrees for more than a month, 118 degrees, record high perhaps in the globe, certainly in the United States, at Norton, Kansas this week, 118 degrees. Rain is so rare and so scarce. We spend a lot of time in our state down on our knees praying for moisture. We spend a lot of time looking up at the sky hoping for moisture. And we need to make sure that the things that we do here in this Congress and the things that the Obama administration does within their administration is not something that diminishes the chances for survival for family farms in the United States, certainly at home in Kansas and around rural America. And so if this was just an isolated instance, perhaps the point had been made and the words had been withdrawn. But I remember we started just a year ago with the Department of Labor that concluded we need to regulate the use of 14 and 15-year-olds on family farms. A real misunderstanding of how production agriculture, how family farms work in our country. Agriculture is a family operation, and yet we had a Department of Labor suggesting that someone 15 years old perhaps should not be able to work on their own family's farm. And I remember just half a year ago, 6 months ago or so, I was on the Senate floor worried about a Department of Agriculture forum on animal safety that was being organized by the Humane Society. And again, my farmers and ranchers would say, if particularly in a time of drought and a time in which the safety net provided by a farm bill is going to become less, please don't do anything that's harmful to us, that reduces the chances for us to succeed. And in this regulatory environment that we find ourselves in, we need to take the steps that promote agriculture, not those things that diminish the opportunity for a farmer or a rancher to earn a living in the free market. Yesterday we had a debate about estate taxes and the consequences to family agriculture across the country. And again, at a time in which the drought is so prevalent, circumstances so difficult, the tax code matters greatly, and the ability to pass a family farm from one generation to the next is a critical thing. And it is so much about agriculture in states like mine that when our farmers and ranchers don't succeed, the opportunity for the communities in which they live and raise their kids, and it's just greatly diminished. This is a way of life for us, and we need to make certain we have a Department of Agriculture that is promoting our farmers and ranchers and their success. I was on the floor yesterday with the senator from Wyoming. We had a conversation about the drought and the state taxes and the farm bill. I'd be interested in knowing if I could yield to the senator from Wyoming any thoughts. I know he's a leader in the Western Caucus, members of the Senate, and we are in the process of writing Secretary Vilsack in regard to the promotion of Meatless Monday. I guess I would also add, before I yield to the senator from Wyoming, certainly those who have a different view about what their menu should be and what they want to eat, that's fine with me. That's a personal decision. But the Department of Agriculture ought to be supportive of the people that produce the food, fiber, and energy for our country each and every day, who get up at sunrise and go to bed after sunset because they're out there trying to make a living on family farms across the country. And I would yield to the senator from Wyoming.
Well, Madam President, I would just say that I would never in my life imagine that I would have seen the United States Department of Agriculture come out against farming, ranching, against agriculture, against the products. I was on a radio station talking this morning in Afton, Wyoming. They were astonished. They hadn't heard the news of this yet. They now are fully aware of it, and they're grateful to actually the senator from Kansas, because one of those involved actually had heard the senator on the floor last night talking about this Meatless Mondays and then the USDA linking ranching, farming to climate change. And it's not just our cattle or beef producers, and beef clearly is the #1 cash crop of Wyoming. But for our farmers, this USDA, they've gone after dairy products, milk, cheese, all as a part of a climate change issue. So this does seem to be an assault against a way of life, a significant part of our country's heritage, as well as our economic future. We see it, this assault on our products through the Department of Agriculture. We see it as an assault on family values of young families, workers working together, as we've seen with the Department of Labor. And now yesterday, with a vote on this Senate floor, an attack by a reinstitution of the death tax. The death tax. When we had a point where people are trying to keep a family operation within the family, a ranch or a farm, and all across rural America, and the small businesses in communities all across the country, finding that it's going to be much more difficult under what the Democrats voted for yesterday to keep that in the family. You know, I know farmers and ranchers in Wyoming where a member of the family works in town just to make the money to pay the expenses of keeping the operation going, the farm or the ranch, knowing full well that if under the Democrat proposal someone were to die once that becomes the case, that their chances of being able to hold on to that operation are reduced to almost nothing, that the costs and the taxes by the death tax, bringing it back to the levels of the Clinton administration, where anything over $1 million in assessed value would be taxed at 55%. The only solution is to sell. And it just does seem that, I mean, that's three specific attacks, the death tax attack, the Meatless Monday attack, the attack on children helping out on the family farm or helping out the neighbors, the values that they learn through the FFA. All of those things make you want to wonder what direction is the country heading in, which I guess is no surprise then when Americans all across the country, only 1 in 3, think that the country is heading in the right direction. So I'm happy to join my colleague from Kansas, who has come to the floor yesterday to bring this to the attention of the Senate. And he and I are working together to now address the Secretary of Agriculture to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again, and to make sure that the Secretary does insist that the farmers and ranchers across this country and the products that they make and should be promoted by the Department of Agriculture receive the proper honor that is deserved to them for what they do to continue to put food on the table and to continue to bring forth the values that are those that built this great country. So I thank my friend and colleague, the senator from Kansas, for bringing this to the attention of the nation.
Madam President, just to conclude my remarks, I would indicate that me and my family will be eating more beef, not less. And I would urge Americans to respond in that way. It is an opportunity for us to support the cattlemen, the livestock producers of our country at a time in which they're selling their herds because the drought is so severe that there's no grass, no feed to feed the cattle, and so the market is depressed. Prices are lower because there's so many sales occurring, and we can help our livestock producers, our farm and ranch families of Kansas and the country by having a hamburger, a steak. Let's go back to that traditional American meal of let's eat beef. The front of my truck at home says eat beef, and I would encourage Kansas and Americans to do so at this point in time when our livestock producers, because of drought, are struggling so greatly. And I would yield the floor, Madam President.